in Great Britain, for example, mentalist is a crazy person.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be. Yeah. Today, I'm speaking to Marc Salem. He's a magician, a mentalist, and the author of a book called Mind Games, which talks about how to influence, persuade, and read people's thoughts based on their body language. So if you're interested in that, please like and subscribe, because we'll have more videos of something similar coming up later, and listen to see what Marc has to say. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Sure.
I remember seeing you on TV years ago doing mentalism and doing a book test and that kind of thing, and I really enjoyed it. So when I got the chance to do this podcast, I thought I'd really like to have a chat to you and talk to you about your book, which I've got here as well, which we can come on to later. But for those people who don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Marc Salem. I am a mentalist, a psychologist, a writer, a teacher. I performed for many years. Now semi-retired, basically. Doing some writing and some research, and I had a wonderful ride, and I enjoy the field, and I enjoy mind games.
Did you consider yourself a magician or a mentalist?
A mentalist. Even a mentalist I didn't particularly like. I used the word purveyor of mind games, but it just became mentalist. Because I know in Great Britain, for example, mentalist is a crazy person.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be. Yeah. You're a total mentalist. Yeah, it can be that. Except I guess it changed a little bit when Darren Brown took off, I suppose, a while back.
Yes.
When people started to understand
and the TV show The Mentalist, there was a television series The Mentalist.
Were you interested in psychology first and then got drawn to mind games, or was it the other way around?
I think it's all, I think simultaneously. I mean, the nature of the mind and how we use it and how we make meaning has always been part of my fascination. So it adds the psychology and the mentalism and all sorts of other things.
Okay, so how did you get started in the performance side of things then? Because that it could almost stay as a hobby, that really, couldn't it? Because it's like an extension of psychology.
Well, to a large extent, I would say that's probably true. I mean, I did have a knack for it. And having had the background in the psychological end of it, certainly it was an asset. And I think I began with some corporate things, and I never went through a magic stage, for example. Okay. But I always was drawn towards it. And then I did some corporate things, and they were successful, and some producers came to corporate, and they liked it, and they produced my first off-Broadway show called Mind Games. And then had exceedingly a successful time traveling around the world several times. And I was a college professor at the time also. So it was a matter of, distributing the way in which I would spend time, classes and travel and that sort of thing, until I left teaching a few years later, and traveled and performed and loved it. Had a great time.
So you mentioned being a college professor, then was that in psychology?
Yes.
Okay. I would imagine your lessons would have been pretty interesting then.
I think they were always popular, right? Look, I believe that a good teacher could teach anything, but particularly psychology enters the realm of the mind, and the mind is my playground.
Yeah. That kind of brings us to a book, really. So there's reading the front cover of reading the front cover. It says, learn how to read the thoughts of others, decipher body language, detect lies, boost your memory. Are all those things a bunch of separate disciplines that you've brought together, or is that one particular view of psychology that allows you to?
Well, I think they're separate disciplines, but I think they all are part of empowering our mind. I mean, look, our mind could be exercised and we could make it better. And, as age begins to creep into my life, I realize that a lot of these activities are an asset to aging minds.
Okay.
I mean, we read of the nuns who exceeded 100 years old, but kept sharp by playing Scrabble or crossword puzzles.
Okay.
That sort of thing. I mean, making connections and new connections were always fascinating to me. And look, that's what humor is about also. Humor is taking ideas and putting it in a new light so that it strikes people as odd or funny.
What's your perspective on neuroplasticity then? Because that seems like it touches on that to me then, this exercise.
Yeah, I don't denigrate psychoanalysis. I just think that it's an entire chapter we could do without. I think we deal with the present, and by delving too much into past, I think we water down the present and the possibilities of the future. Okay. I think there's people who've been in analysis for 40 years. It hasn't helped. I don't think that's the place to be. Now, again, that's an independent. Look, my best friend in the world is a mentalist and a psychiatrist, Richard Marc, who I've written several books with, and who's head of psychiatry in Miami. And but I do find some of the basic notions a little silly.
Okay, basic notions of psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
It's a controversial one, isn't it? It's almost like if you're gonna focus on it, you're gonna get more of it. That's
it's another way of telling the story.
Okay.
And I think that's basically what we're all about, is storytellers, myth makers. Regardless of what you do, I mean, you put yourself in your own story and you create myth, things that you actualize and that you integrate as meaning into your own system.
Okay, and then as a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, you mean?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I need to do more of that, I think. I mean,
the more you do it, the more you enjoy it. I mean, again, it's not a work, it's a play, which is why I called the show Mind Games. I think that games are strategy, but games are also fun. And I think it's important to tie the two together.
Okay. Does that link in with is it Eric Berne, the games people play?
Yes, I remember games people play. Yes, he basically was doing with what he called transactional analysis, which basically was another way of telling the story. Person A, B, and C, and he would have permutations of that sort of thing. I'm okay, you're okay was part of his work. I never, maybe briefly at the beginning, liked it, but it was another way of telling the story. Basically, instead of id, ego, superego, he has adult, child, and I forget what the third thing was, but it was the same functions, just different names.
Yeah. I remember when I got interested in mentalism for a little while years ago, and I remember, I guess the history of mentalism is kind of more like implying you've got supernatural powers and then using traditional magical techniques to kind of delude people or to deceive people. Whereas when that whole thing hit about disguising it with psychology instead of with the supernatural, then it took me years to spot it. Then I went down a wormhole of psychological study for a couple of years before I was like, no, this is just traditional magic. But that kind of misdirection completely caught me off guard.
Except traditional magic itself is firmly based in good psychological thinking.
Yeah, in terms of misdirection and
I mean, and some neuroscientific thinking. I mean, there's a great book now on the science of neuroscience of magic.
Okay.
As time goes on, I think that many of the boundaries we put up are superficial. I was trained as a generalist, that, in other words, not taking just one discipline, but many disciplines, both as an academic and as a performer. And I enjoyed the generalist approach.
Okay. In the psychological,
many points of view, instead of just one. I mean, look, there's a television show called Sesame Street, and I was director of research for a decade back in the 80s.
Oh, wow. So what did that entail then? What did that, doing research?
It entailed most all the pieces had goals. And it was, the goals had to be distinguished. And then you'd go to a school, or a group of kids would be brought to the office, and you would test to see how they responded to it, whether the goals were reached. And what kind of segments and what worked best. And again, look, what we basically found were children who watched with their parents, for example, got the most out of the show. Because they assumed their parents put import on it, so they put import on it.
Sure.
Which is why the show had to work on many levels of both entertaining the parent as well as the child.
Okay, that's fascinating, isn't it? So, yeah, who thought that Sesame Street had a research department?
Yeah.
You think they have a puppet making department, but that's like as far as it would go. Yeah, that's fascinating then. How did, I mean? So you've got a really solid grounding in psychology then. In what way did that inform your magic?
It certainly made me think about, well, effects research was an important part of what I was looking at. What are the effects of violence on television? I worked on the government studies of that. And
that's really fascinating.
What are the effects of writing? And suddenly we used the same word in magic and mentalism, the effect of something, not AFF, but EFF, the effect. What's the effect of this trick, of this approach, of this idea? And I operated very much on trying to understand how things influence us, both for real and as part of a story scheme.
Okay, you mentioned violence on television there.
Yes.
Have they come to a solid conclusion what the effects of violence on television are?
Well, their basic conclusion of the Surgeon General study, of which I was on the staff of, was that some violence affects some children some of the time under some circumstances.
Okay.
Which is, you can't stare at a blank wall for 20 hours a day without having it affect you. So certainly, but I think that its power is, again, in the story making, that we integrate those stories into our life and we make meaning out of them. So it's the story making and the meaning making.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my perspective on it was always, as I used to be a media student, so my perspective on it was always that I'm quite happy watching, pretend violence in a Hollywood movie. But if I see two people arguing in the street and they're not even making physical contact, I find that extremely uncomfortable. Whereas the film I'm fine with. So I think we sort of intuitively know what pretend is and what isn't.
Yeah, except we could become calloused towards certain kinds of violence because we see it so often. But as a media student, one of my mentors was Marshall McLuhan, and I always felt the medium is the message. It's not necessarily what you say, but the very fact that it's being said influences the way in which you see it.
Okay, yeah, sure. So like you were saying about the parents.
In other words, if you see a sign that says fresh fruit sold here, and it's written by hand, but you see another one where it's in boxed, well-printed letters, chances are you are going to want to buy the one that's hand printed. The other feels too corporate.
Yeah.
But if you see a sign that says skydiving lessons given here, and it's handwritten, I'm not too sure you're excited by it. But if you see it corporate, then it looks well. Like I tell my students, you don't want an I love you note that's typed. You want one that's handwritten.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the medium it comprises part of the message as well. Then, so how does that again? How does that
dominates it? If not dominates it,
really?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's McLuhan's basic point, that the message is the medium, not what's being said.
What does that say about the content then? Does it say anything?
Content is secondary.
Okay.
You know, look, McLuhan was proven to be correct, where we live in a world today of imagery. I mean, words, I mean, the entire internet is a world of imagery and memes. I mean, it has nothing to do with the real content. Now, I mean, you could always argue real content is overrated as a virtue, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah, that really relates back to the mentalism or mind games, or purveyor of, what did you call it? Purveyor of
mind games. Yeah, purveyor of mind games.
Yeah, because I remember Darren Brown has talked a lot about that in Pure Effect and things like that.
Yes.
He's talked about he's really big on presentation, isn't he? So if, like, I remember one point he was talking about his selection of a pen for a mentalism effect, and he would pick a Mont Blanc pen just to add, you know, because all of that is elements of his communication as well. Whereas if it conveys a very different message, doesn't it? If you pick a Bic, it's twofold. One has an element of style to it, the Mont Blanc, but it also implies that you've considered it previously, what it is you're going to do. Whereas if you have a Bic pen that you get in a cafe and you do the same effect with it, it implies it's more spontaneous. Is that the kind of thing?
You're absolutely correct. And that's key buzzword that is always on my mind, is making it look spontaneous.
Okay.
To me, it's far, you know, I mean, Darren and I have totally different styles. He's a good friend, but, you know, his is the grand gesture and mine is the, you know, offhand comment. And the seeming spontaneity of it all. You don't want your Darren show and think it's spontaneous. You realize there's 40 different moving parts going on, even if you can't keep track of them all. I want the audience just to keep track of me and the everydayness of it, not, you know, so I prefer simple objects, simple things, and I'll use a Bic or I'll borrow a pencil.
Yeah, even better. Yeah. It's strange how when you get interested in mentalism, you spend half your life in like a stationer's and the other half in like a haberdashery department.
Oh yeah, I love, you know, Ryman's or Staples. I mean, they are, as they say, the magic shop for mentalists.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So I won't take up too much of your time. It would be also nice to know how, if you're retired now, how are you spending your day? Are you still doing magic?
Yeah, I'm doing several books and some lectures, and you know, I just completed a series of programs. So I mean, I'm not totally out of things, but I just think, let's give the younger a chance and let me spend more time with my family. And, you know, I put in a pretty rigorous schedule for a few decades, and I'm happy where I am, and I don't want to push it. I mean, I've met my, look, I've been on Broadway, I've been on the West End, I've been around the world. I just don't have many more mountains of performing to climb. So I'm looking for some new mountains.
So the books that you're writing, are they psychologically based? I imagine they're not related to performance.
One's related to performance. A very big book I'm writing with Richard Marc, the psychiatrist.
Okay.
My co-writer.
is that something that will be out soon, or is that way off? Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say soon. I'd say a year.
A year. Okay.
In a year.
All right. It's been great talking to you. And
thank you very much for thinking of me.
You're welcome.
And I think of your backdrop often. It's invaded my nightmares. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a bit of a nightmare with green screen earlier on, but it was like collapsing, so it looked like the phone boxes were actually genuinely falling, but we're all right now.
Great.
Feel free to let me know when the book comes out, and I can stick a link under the
Stay in touch, buddy.
I will. All right.
Okay.
Thanks
I'm
very
delighted.
much.